Welcome back to the lab. Right, good progress on this the Silvia beastie here. Stuff and things, it's hard to drive. There you go. So I'll show you that in a minute. I just wanted to show you something quickly before I take it off the hoist and put the Gloria back on. So there's all the prettiness. Pretty. I've made that catch can there. Yep, the hoses are down near the bottom. That's to kind of tuck them away, keep things hidden. It's an oil catch can. It's a ventilation system. It's not a fluid containment device as such, although Motorsport New Zealand rules dictate that it's got to be 2 litres in capacity to hold 2 litres worth of oil. It still will do that anyway, because the oil will fill up from the bottom before it spews out the top. So, and that keeps the hoses basically on a downhill route. So anything that comes into the hose, apart from that last little piece just there, is pretty much all downhill, and it'll help it get rid of all the water and stuff into the catch can. It makes it easier to drain it too. Like, you can just chuck a rag down underneath here and crack that fitting off, and anything that's in there will drain out. So that's that. Engine bay pretty much all sorted out. I was going to put AN6 fittings on the fuel system to do away with these barbs and the rubber hose. I was going to replace that with Teflon and everything. The fitting in the fuel pressure regulator in the middle of your screen there, it's actually pretty much seized in the reg. I tried to undo that. It was extremely tight. I don't want to break that off and stuff the regulator and cause delays. We've got a tune booked a few days away, and the way couriers work in New Zealand at the moment was too risky. So we'll leave well enough alone. Had a quick wander around the car just to make sure everything's good before we take it over for a tune, because it's likely it'll get tuned and it's potentially going to end up driving straight down to wherever, South Island somewhere. And grabbed hold of this front wheel here. Well, actually, I leaned against it while I was talking to someone. Bit of a problem there. Not sure you can see that very easily on the camera. She wriggles. Wriggles. Normally that would be a hub bearing. In this case, yeah, I don't know if you can see it. 2 bolts on the knuckle here. This one here and the one below it. They're both loose. So the knuckle's loose on the strut, which is, it's not ideal. I mean, it wasn't really going to cause any major problems, but you certainly can't leave it loose like that. It won't pass a warrant. So I'm just going to nip those up. I've checked over everything else. The rest of the car seems pretty good for what we're up to. And a couple of earths I need to put back on. They were positioned in a pretty silly spot, so I'll put them somewhere else. There's one there, and there's one over here somewhere that we've lost. It's just speaker wire on this side. There you go. So they're just earths for the horn anyway. So I took those off while I was doing other things. They were tucked under here. I'm going to put them somewhere a bit nicer so things will work a bit better. But yeah, she goes. Motor is a little bit noisy. It's a little bit louder than what I would like. I've double checked everything in the top end. That's all good. We might have maybe excessive piston to bore clearance or something like that, making it a little bit knocky at idle. It's not too bad. There wasn't massive quantities of metal in the oil or anything like that, so she should be alright. So yeah, got the wheels off to have a look at this. Might be easier to see it now. I don't know. Yeah, you can definitely see that. There you go. It's a bit hard to hold the camera and move things without moving myself and making it less obvious. So you can see there's signs that those have been moving. If you look especially the bottom one there, it's chewed away at the powder coating and the paint. So it's a bit of something you could look for to see if bolts have been loose without even touching anything. If you see something like that around the bolt head or nut head, it's nut base, it's usually something to keep an eye on. So we'll put our spanner on there. Yeah, she's not tight. Definitely not tight. That's pretty easy. We're going to need to hold the other end of the spanner now. Oh, not yet. Wow. So that's, I'd say there's a couple of turns in that at least to make that tight. Weird. Like normally you see play on a wheel like that, it's going to be the bearing on the hub, and that's actually, I was talking to the owner's father at the time, and I leaned against the wheel and said, oh wow, we've got a hub that's worn out, we need some new hub bearings, and went to the trouble of getting a quote for a new hub. bearing assembly, and then thought before I order that, because it was quite expensive, I'll just have another look and make sure what we're actually dealing with. So fortunately this will cost them 10 minutes time rather than a few $100, so that's all good. So bolts are tightened up and the wheel's back on, couple of nuts on there just to check it. We're still not done. You can clearly hear that. So what we've got now, it's a bit dark in there, isn't it, for you guys? There you go. That locking collar right there in the middle of the screen, between the, I'm going to call it a clevis on the bottom of the shock here, and the main shock body, that nut's not tight enough. So now we've got movement there as well. So yeah, interesting. I'll check the other side. That wheel's got to come off and tighten that back up. Never mind, it'll be a better car than what it was when he dropped it off, so that's all good. Seems to run okay considering it hasn't had a tune, but it's definitely not the quietest motor I've heard. A little bit knocking, that's not really a knock. Almost variable cam gear noise, but that's apparently been rebuilt, so does quieten down a little bit when it gets warmer. Have to see what the customer thinks of that. Can't really do much else in the top end to make it quieter. New cam gear perhaps. So that's ready to go, I think. Aside from that little noise we're a little bit concerned about, not that worried about. This is the Gloria Progress here. No motor, no gearbox, no drive shaft, no exhaust, and no paint. The problem was, the other thing I've done actually, before I go into something else, is seam welded that whole transmission tunnel. You can see from the other side that it was just stitch welded on the inside edge. Certify wanted a full seam weld on it, so just to make it easier, I've done it from this side, because it's a lot easier to weld onto the top of that from in the tunnel than what it is to weld onto the bottom of this on the other side of the floor. That makes life quite tricky. So when all this paint came off, everything under here, most of it's in amazingly good condition, as you can see, but there's some problems. That's actually not quite one of the problems. You come along a bit further here, we've actually rusted from the inside out, so that's quite an issue. Don't really want to go chucking a whole crap load more torque into the front of this thing and have the chassis rusting. So it's not a complete disaster. It's not really bad, but it's bad enough I'm not happy with it. So we're just getting the certifier to come and have a look and run through some options on what he would want us to do to make that better. The idea I've got at the moment is to simply stitch on to up here where it's all good, where it's not rusting. Stitch a panel on a U section and bring it down a few millimeters, like half an inch or an inch or something like that. So drop the whole chassis rail down to give it more sectional area, cross-sectional area, and more strength. And then we can and probably leave that in place, pop some hole saws through it along the way to make sure that when we spray rust inhibitor we get all surfaces all covered, and that will deal with that will fix it. We'll have a chat with the certifier and make sure he's happy with that. That's one way to do it. Obviously you could cut the whole thing out, you could undo all the stitch welds, and you could make a completely new chassis rail all the way through to here. Huge job. You could take that off to do it. By the time you run around and take everything off that you need to take off to get to it to replace it, you're dealing with some significant issues, and you're probably better off just to put a patch over the top. So we'll do a slightly better job than this munty patch that's in here. This is all some sort of epoxy slash bog slash whatever, PIR 15 or something like that. Don't know. There's a patch put on the inside that isn't rusting. It does look like rust, but it's not. It's just shitey brown paint. I think I showed you before. I put the plug welds through onto our existing chassis rail into our new chassis rail. plus the stitch welds on the edge flush of the extra bit there, plus some welding underneath where you can't see, so that's all good. And yeah, all that weld that you see right in the middle of the screen now, that's done. That one up the back of this panel where it joins onto that panel, the strut tower, that's all welded up, so everything's looking pretty good. Just resolved a little issue with this white line sway bar for I'm not sure if it's S15, I think it's an S13 one. It was actually a bit wide for our particular setup, and it was actually very, very close to hitting the clevis here. So I've taken that out, put that in the press, and just straightened that bend out a little bit, which has moved that inboard and given us clearance so we're not going to hit that clevis when we're turning steering lock to lock. I've just sent the customer a message and said, where's your paint at? What have you got? What brand is it? How much? All that sort of carry on, because if everything goes according to plan, we might be able to start getting some paint on some of these areas that aren't going to need, in theory, aren't going to need any more fiddling with, like the bulk of the firewall and that. So that'll be exciting. Many fun times. It looks quite cool, that car. Nothing wrong with a nice S15. Very tidy. Well, it's tidy enough. Looks very tidy. So something pretty interesting with this car. The owner of the car contacted me and pointed out he was having some issues with the electrical system, which does not surprise me, because the battery that was in the car, the smaller of those two that are down there, that was dead. It was smoked. It wasn't working. Done its dash. That alone causes a little bit of a problem. That's a Bosch N40, which is like the smallest battery you can buy. And because of the particular brand that is, and the model design, etc., etc., that battery is actually slightly smaller than, this is an AA version, Century Yuasa and all the other batteries that you can buy today. So that fitted in the car in this position. Just to make this one fit into the car, I've had to remove a cover from the back of the headlight. Now I can show you on this battery, that white mark you see there is where the cover on the back of the headlight was rubbing against the battery. So that alone's a little bit of a headache, but never mind, that's something we can deal with that needs a battery in the boot ultimately, a bigger battery fitted in the boot and all the wiring and the hundreds of dollars that comes along with it. This is my battery for the trailer, for the winch on the trailer. Happens to have the terminals on the right side and all that sort of carry on. So that's there for now, in the meantime, while we're dealing with something else. Now the quirk this thing has is you turn the headlights on, and apparently the headlights were very dim, and the alternator light would come on. And so I fired the car up, and sure enough, it does actually do that. And the funny thing is, the voltage that you see at the battery here, this isn't hooked up to the battery at the moment, this was reading 0, I'll get to that in a second. The voltage you see at the battery here was 15 volts while the headlights were on. Just kind of overcharging by quite a bit. You should be seeing maybe 14.5 or something, to be at the high end of things. So that was interesting. How do you make a car actually charge at a higher voltage while the headlights are on compared to when they're off, which is kind of backwards to what you would normally see if there was a fault. How you do that is you screw up the wiring somehow. I'm not entirely certain what someone has done at this point in time. But you screw it up so that your headlights draw power from the wire that tells the alternator how much electricity is in the rest of the system, how much voltage. So what we've got here is the plug from the alternator is unplugged. Let's get the torch and show you. There it is, right there. Bottom of the screen in the middle, and there's the probe from the multimeter stuffed up its bum there. So that is now measuring the voltage from that pin to the positive terminal on the battery. 0 volts, right? So they're the same. They've got the same amount of potential difference there. So there's no reading. So we come in here, and we turn the headlights on. Ta-da! You heard the relay going. Headlights are going. And yep, there they are. 1 and 2. It's good. Everything's looking great. 2.7 volts. There's a potential difference from the battery terminal there to the wire that goes into the back of the alternator down there that I showed you before. I can't be bothered getting the torch again. Of 2.8 volts, hereabouts. So what that means is the poor little alternator will be buzzing away. It'll be going, we've got whatever it's trying to aim at, let's say 14.2 volts. 14.2 volts, we're good, we're good. You turn on the headlights, suddenly there's a massive current draw on that wire, pulling voltage down due to a resistance somewhere, and it can't supply the voltage, the amperage actually is what the issue is, it pulls the voltage down. And so now we get maybe about 10 volts or something like that into the back of the alternator. The alternator goes, oh, that's not enough, we need more than that. So the alternator ups its game to provide 14 volts or whatever, 14.2 volts at the wire that's in the back of the alternator. Meanwhile, that is up to 15 volts, overcharging, killing the battery, and stressing the hell out of everything else in the electrical system. Right, so now, next game is to go in there and figure out what this person I've never met, don't know him, what he's done. Apparently one of the headlights wasn't working when the car was converted to turbo. Stuff happened with wiring. One of the headlights wasn't working and he managed to fix it. He's done something silly. I've got to get in here and figure it all out. It's fun and games. So we'll turn that back off and look. 0 volts again. Funny, eh? So car running with no headlights on, everything's working good, charging system's working perfectly, charging at normal voltages, turn the headlights on, and it overvolts and the alternator light comes on. Gotta love modified cars, they're awesome, eh? And just like that, it's fixed. So, end result was, I didn't spend a lot of time. I did spend a bit of effort in having a look around, see if I could figure out where we're getting this massive voltage drop to the sense wire for the alternator. And in the end, I was like, right, I don't know. And we're going to end up chewing up hours and hours and hours looking for it, trying to figure out that one little fault. And ultimately, the electrical circuit simply connects the positive terminal of the battery to the sense pin on the side of the alternator at the back of the alternator. It goes from there and it runs off from here, runs off into the car, goes through several plugs, comes back through the engine harness and down to the alternator and onto the side of it. Somewhere in there and all that stuff there is a fault caused by someone who's fiddled with wiring, who's done something he shouldn't have done, or something's worn out or dirty connection or bent pin or whatever it is. Bypass all that. So we pulled the plug out of the side of the alternator, which is down there. Not that black one you can see. There's a shiny new wire down there actually, you can see. Pulled the plug out, depinned it, put a new wire on from inside here. There's a positive terminal in there. So it goes straight down through a fuse and into the side of the alternator. And what do you know? Problem solved. It's working perfectly. So there's still something wrong with the headlights, clearly, with the circuit to run the headlights. It should not be drawing current from the sense wire for the alternator. Should not be pulling that down like it is. I don't know what's going on there. I've advised the customer of that. It's something we'll have to look at a later date because I don't have time for it right now. I'm supposed to be working on the Gloria up here. So, haven't heard from the certifier today. He was booked to come and have a look. He's probably busy. I guess I'll hear from him tomorrow or chase him up or whatever. Meantime, excuse the slightly agricultural approach to things. Fit gearbox, flywheel and trigger wheel and all that sort of carry on together. Just one bolt in there just to hold it, just to confirm our trigger sensor position, comparison to the mount, etc. And it's just as well that I've done that, because although the guy's done a relatively good job of mounting this on here, it isn't actually in the correct alignment to where it's supposed to be. I'm just going to grab the sensor off the toolbox here behind you. So, good little trick to check that things are lining up the way they should be. Put a blue tack on the end of it. Give it a clean. Stick some... Oh, I've run out of focus. Where's our focus gone? There it is. Give it a clean so the blue tack will stick to that and not your trigger wheel. Stick it on there. Bang it in the hole. And as you can see, that does not line up. These sensors are really, really fussy, and that will be enough that this would not have run properly. This would have had issues. So, last thing I want to be doing is mucking around with a sensor not sitting accurately in the car. It's way, way, way easier to fix this on the bench. Let's call it the bench. It's actually on the floor, isn't it? But whatever. So that's my next little thing we're doing with the Gloria. I will reface this so that the sensor cocks around to the correct position to get our trigger wheel and everything lined up. It's I don't want to muck around with spacers and shifting flywheel and everything, then our ring gear doesn't line up with the starter motor correctly and all that sort of carry on. So that's all factory stuff and factory position at the moment, so I don't want to move it. The other thing I'm looking at is the gear position and gear lever. It's not the best. It's got a short shift kit on it. You can see what movement's happening there. As that gear lever goes across the gate, it's actually swinging in an arc, which is pretty yucky, but you could live with it. Because it's such a short shift on it and there's no lockout for reverse, it's quite possible that fifth to reverse instead of fifth to sixth could be a thing. So and have a bit of a think about what can be done with that. The gear lever is also just a tiny little bit far back in the car from where we'd like it. It'd be nice if it was here rather than here. So that's something I've got to dream up something better than what we've got and see what I can come up with. Fun and games. Alright, it's getting dark. Look, you can see me in the mirror. It's a window. It's too dark outside. Time to go inside and plan stuff and things for tomorrow. Be a phone call in the morning and see when we're going to get the certifier here. Might put that on the trailer and get it ready for its trip to Tauranga. Alright, cheers, bye.